as an athlete was focused on running faster over 1,500 meters. If it was extraneous to that, it was irrelevant and I wouldn't do it. And then going into a job where you have multiple goals to be hitting, I actually found that quite difficult where there was no singular focus.
Hello and welcome to Run the Business, the weekly podcast that explores the place where running and leadership come together. We'll find out how running can help us with leading, managing people, and generally being better in business. We'll also try and answer that question, do runners make better leaders? I'm Anthony Gay, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by an Olympian who has represented Team GB at both Beijing in 2008 and London 2012. But not only is he a two-time Olympian, an Olympic, World, Commonwealth and European finalist, but perhaps his most famous or certainly relatable achievement in running to many of us is that this man is the parkrun world record holder. After being forced into early retirement from professional running through injury, he's since talked about the challenges he faced in losing his identity as a runner, which we'll talk about in this interview as well. He co-founded the Running Channel, a YouTube channel for runners of all abilities to entertain and educate. It has a global audience of over 500,000 subscribers. Andy Baddeley, welcome to Run the Business.
Thanks for having me. That's the best intro ever, so I'll come again.
Brilliant stuff. Andy, first question on Run the Business. When did you last go running?
Oh, the Sunday. What are we now? Thursday, actually. So yeah, I've not been great this week, but Sunday.
And do you have a regular routine usually, or is it just kind of when you feel? I
mean, the irony, I suppose, is I had the most regular routine as a professional athlete, and then when I didn't have to do it anymore, that went out the window. And I have 3 young children, so my routine is their routine. So I grab a run when I can, basically.
I feel your I won't say pain, it's not pain, but I feel that experience that you're going through. Now, for those who might not be familiar with your journey through running, firstly, could you tell us a bit about how you went from growing up on the Wirral to being a professional athlete? Yeah,
I mean, I didn't set out to be a professional athlete, I don't think. I went along with a friend when I was about 10, last year of primary school, to cross-country club because his mum wanted him to do something because he was lazy. And he grabbed me, I went along, and then he gave up after a couple of months, and I'm broadly still going now, and that's 30 years ago. And then through kind of high school, I ran and was pretty good. But like actually when I first started school, there was loads of people just in my own year at my own school who were a lot better than me. And I just kind of kept showing up because I loved it. I thought it was fun and getting a bit muddy in cross-country and making friends, like so that power of shared experience. Mm-hmm. I did other sports too, swimming and football and things like that. And ironically, I think I was better suited to team sports, but I was just better at running. Mm-hmm. And then throughout school, I kind of just kept turning up and people kind of dropped by the wayside and I could see the improvements I was making and started to take it more and more seriously. And then even by the time I was kind of 18 and university bound, I was definitely still putting academics first. It was only really in my final year at university, so I was 21. My 4th year at university, I kind of teamed up with my coach who coached me then throughout the rest of my career. And that was just because I was coaching the cross-country team at university, and because at Cambridge, everything was self-coached. So it was just students kind of making it up as we went along. Yeah. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to set training sessions for 40 to 100 people that were vastly different in ability. So I spoke to Andy Baddeley, who became my coach, who I'd met previously. And because he was coaching the team through me, I kind of had to show up a bit more often than I had been. And I had to do a little bit more constructive training that was better pieced together. And through that, I just saw this dramatic improvement at the age of 21. I'd kind of plateaued from 18 to 21. I'd been quite good as a junior and then just not really broken through. And then all of a sudden, just saw this massive improvement, started making GB teams, ran my first sub 4 minute mile. I've still got the empty bottle of champagne that Andy bought me after that, actually. So that was 2004, I think. And then from that, Andy then convinced me to not take a PhD and to give it a year with him training properly down in London. Right. And I kind of gave myself that year and then again saw even more improvement. And then that was then the kind of the reality kicked in that maybe I could make the Olympics or at least regularly run for Great Britain. And you still never quite dare to believe that you'll be at the Olympics. And then by the time the Olympics came around in 2008, in my head, it wasn't a matter of like making the Olympic team. It was I could win a medal at the Olympics. And it's amazing how quickly the goalposts shift. And then you're disappointed when you don't win that medal.
And I'm sure you've been asked this many, many times about representing Great Britain at the Olympics. We could probably fill an entire podcast with that. More than a decade on. I mean, well, Beijing was even longer than that. What memories stick around in your mind about that time?
I think Beijing was a kind of cooler experience than London 2012, bizarrely. Like the pressure that I felt for London 2012 was totally different because it was at home. I lived in London as well, and it felt a bit strange to have that huge thing in your town where you lived. Obviously a big city.
Yeah.
But actually going to my first Olympics, traveling to quite literally the other side of the world, and the culture that was so different, and that exotic element of it, that was kind of more what the Olympics had been to me as a kid, like seeing it in these far-flung, incredible places like Sydney and Atlanta and Barcelona. I suppose Barcelona's not so far-flung, but it wasn't home, and it was, in a different language and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So going to Beijing was this really magical experience, feeling like you're doing the single thing that you've been training for your whole life almost, and that the whole world is watching. And yeah, it felt very different there to it did in 2012, and I think I enjoyed Beijing more because of that.
And did you mentioned structure and routine that you went through and you built to when you were at university? Did that, jumping straight into kind of where you are now, did that mindset and that structure and that organization, which I'm sure was a huge part of your training, did that serve you well later in life? Yeah,
I don't know whether it's the structure per se, but it's definitely the singular pursuit of something that filled my kind of every waking hour as a runner. Initially, I struggled with that in terms of the real world in business and in a job, where in a normal job, there's not one singular goal so like everything that I was doing day to day, literally from waking up to going to sleep as an athlete, was focused on running faster over 1,500 meters. So running faster for 3 3/4 lap to the track. If it was kind of extraneous to that, it was irrelevant and I wouldn't do it. So if it was a distraction, it didn't even feature in my routine. Mm-hmm. And then going into a job where you have, multiple tasks and I suppose multiple goals to be hitting from a personal development perspective, but also from a colleague or management perspective, and then from the business goals of, like, I don't know, raising revenue or improving performance or managing some processes. I actually found that quite difficult where there was no singular focus. But from a work ethic perspective, I suppose the biggest thing that I've taken into my life now is that I don't require motivating. So I don't. It's not someone shouting at me, or it's not that I'm chasing wealth, or it's like I want to be good at something because otherwise why would I bother doing it? So I suppose that was my approach in running. I was like, well, if I'm going to do it, this is everything that I'm going to do, and I'm going to, even though I didn't achieve it or everything that I wanted to achieve, I don't feel like I really could have done much differently, which is easier to make peace with. And that's kind of my approach at university. Like, I was obsessive with my academics to the point of, like, well, I gave up running for 12 weeks for my finals because Cambridge is pretty full on, and I was doing an engineering degree, which was incredibly intensive. And so then that 12-week period was, 8 a.m. in the morning till 11 p.m. at night in the library every day. No running, no breaks. I mean, obviously breaks for food and stuff, but just like straight through. I was like, well, I don't want to look back and think, could I have worked a bit harder? So that's maybe painting a slightly obsessive picture, but that was my approach.
Does it make you quite ruthless in that pursuit? I don't know whether that's the right word or not. You said obsessive in focusing on a single goal. Is that something you've had to sort of balance a bit more as you sort of move through life?
I suppose the thing that's the balance comes in the fact that I could go to experts, and I had an amazing team of people that helped me with stuff that they knew loads more about. So my coach, the physios, worked with some amazing, sports doctors and strength coaches and psychologists and stuff. But still, ultimately, when I went out and trained or performed, like, it was on me. And then now I'm in trying to lead a team. You're in this position where actually you have to let other people do stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's probably the most difficult thing. And interestingly, being the shoe on the other foot, as it were, like being a coach, like I spoke to Andy, my coach, about it recently, about how hard it is to go out just to think you've done everything you can do, and then watch the person that you've been coaching go out there and perform when you can't control the outcome. And that's not massively different in terms of trying to build a team and trying to get the right people in that can do the job. And ultimately, I'm then doing my job if I don't have to do anything. Probably that's pretty tricky to get your head around.
And you mentioned sports psychology, which I guess is something that you've explored and worked with your coach over the years and became quite familiar with. Is that something which you've been able to take through into work? And when you coach your team, is that coaching mindset, does it come from your athletics background, or have you sort of expanded out into other sort of business type coaching now?
There's definitely some really key elements that I've tried to help people with. I appreciate that sort of an approach to sports psychology is quite personal. So obviously a good sports psychologist has worked with me on things that are going to work for me, as coping strategies for stress, or ways of, allowing yourself to focus in like a fast paced environment. And those are the things I do try to say to my team of, I found this useful, or I found this a sensible way of working. But kind of related to that, the most useful part was that understanding how different everyone's personalities are and were, and kind of trying to understand my own internal motivation, but also how I behaved under pressure, because ultimately that's quite an important thing to know if you're going to go up and race in front of 100,000 people.
Yeah.
Or could be injured, and trying to manage that process, which actually I was before Beijing. Like, I didn't really run for the 4 or 5 weeks before the Olympics. It was fascinating to me that my psychologist went through everything with me, where they said, well, this is your personality type based on your answers. Does this sound true? And it did. It felt very true. And then she kind of went through, and this is your kind of opposite personality that you might find most difficult to understand in someone else. And every single trait of that was my wife. But that fundamentally changed our relationship for the better, where we both went through that process then of that she undertook the same kind of stuff as part of like a major part of my support team for the Olympics. She did the same psychological profile so that we could see whether that actually did validate that. And it did, and that changed all of the stuff that I assumed she was doing to just annoy me. I then understood why, and vice versa. And then part of my kind of, don't get me wrong, my limited psychology knowledge was that it was explained to me that opposite personality to me was ultimately how I may well act under the biggest pressure. So instead of going from kind of extroverted and like really big picture, I would like potentially in times of stress become more introverted and focused on like real specific and potentially irrelevant detail in order to kind of probably control the controllables. So yeah, I found that fascinating, and that is something that's definitely influenced the way that I speak to people now, and try to take a deep breath when someone's doing something and put it in the context of maybe they're not doing that to annoy me, and maybe it's on me to deliver the information to them in a kind of better way.
You mentioned pressure, and you mentioned the pressure of performing in front of thousands and thousands of people. Do you still feel pressure today? What puts you under pressure week to week in your life right now?
Yeah, I feel pressure all of the time. Maybe I put myself under that pressure to just be successful in inverted commas, but I'm sort of now measuring my success in terms of, can I build a team that are effective together, that actually want to work for each other? And don't get me wrong, like I'm not a CEO of a 1,000-person business. There's 10 of us, but that's challenging, and it's challenging every day, because sometimes I'm just maybe not very good at it, and I'm pretty harsh. I'm a harsh self-critic that I should have handled that differently. I suppose that is the athlete mindset of trying to learn from getting knocked down. Like in athletics, only one person gets to win every race that you do. So it's pretty rare that you just go through your career winning everything. So every time you lose or have a loss, like how do you take it? And I would definitely pride myself on kind of picking myself back up. But I do have to acknowledge that like that's not everyone's attitude, and some people bounce back quicker than others, and also everyone works at a different pace. So that's what gives me stress to kind of, I forget what your actual question was there.
Yeah, just around the pressure that I'm just trying to understand, because you have felt pressure, as an athlete at that highest level, and once you've experienced that, I just wondered around the pressure, and obviously everybody gets pressured and stressed at some point, but I just wondered how it felt compared to the pressure of when you were performing. I guess I'm trying to understand if it feels easier later in life when you've had that extreme pressure on you. But it sounds like it's just different.
Yeah, it's different. It's more like it's over a longer period, isn't it? I suppose the pressure just builds and builds and builds when you're building up to a major championship event, and then actually you have this like massive kind of flat period after it happens, because then you're like, well, what now? It's another 4 years until I do this again. So that pressure is different, much more intense, and the idea of that performance for 4 minutes every year or 4 minutes every 4 years ultimately being the test or the scale by which you're then paid for the next 4 years, is that's very difficult to know that you could wake up with a cold or twist your ankle, and then that's the difference between being paid to run for the next 3 or 4 years by a shoe company or by lottery funding and not getting anything at all and having to go and get a job, or carry on and just pay your own way in terms of getting into debt and so on, or get a part-time job, full-time job, which obviously loads of people do. But my attitude back then was very much that I needed to be 100% in with running, and at the time I didn't feel like I had time to work. So the answer to the pressure thing now is that I feel pressure from two different things. I feel pressure to be a good manager, a good leader, and I definitely make mistakes fairly regularly in that. And I perhaps pour myself into the emotions of my team and their needs more than would make me more effective, probably, if I could distance myself from it. But I feel pressure to kind of solve problems for them or to help them have the tools to solve their problems. And then in parallel to that, I feel the pressure of the business. Like, ultimately, I'm leading a business that has raised money from investors, and they expect a return, and ultimately I'm trying to build a successful business. So we want the same thing, but you go about things at a slightly different pace than you might if you were going about it purely for your own purposes, as it were.
And when you realized your professional running career, might be coming to an end, when the injury sort of came up, had you already considered at that point the job or career that you might want to do down the line, or were you so in the moment and in the zone that it wasn't relevant?
So I was injured pretty much all the time between 2012 and 2016. I kept trying to come back, and then getting injured again, or just not being able to do it properly. And then I ultimately had surgery in early 2015 and did manage to get back for a decent year in 2016 to try and make a third Olympics. But it was the end of that year when I then picked up another injury and had my second child that I was like, I can't be as selfish as this requires anymore. So during the end of that period, so it did take a few years of being injured before I was even considering the idea of what I'd need to do next, because I was all in on my recovery. So when I was fully fit and healthy, I was running 12 times a week, running close to 100 miles a week, 3 gym sessions on top of that. That was really full on. And then all of a sudden when you're injured, you think, well, you'll have some downtime, but actually you have to train harder. Or it felt to me you had to put more time in, because if you're in the swimming pool, it's actually quite hard to get your heart rate as high as it is on a run. And so I was definitely either doing it for longer or working harder to try to keep my heart rate up to make it in some way equivalent to the training I'd have been doing. And then I started to accept that this isn't going to last forever. I was doing a little bit of work with the Dame Kelly Holmes Trust, who do some amazing stuff in the community to kind of engage young people through sport and to give people opportunities they might not otherwise have through training and getting them into jobs and so on. And as part of that, actually, the trust themselves offered me access to a kind of transition course, which was fascinating because it just made the idea of transitioning from a professional athlete into getting a real job just made me think about it in a slightly different way. I still would never have known I was going to do what I'm doing now, so I definitely didn't set out to launch the running channel or have those thoughts back then. But I at least started planning, and I was speaking to people like Parkrun with as a record holder. I thought maybe that might open some doors there, and I was passionate about what they did in the community about running. I was working with a friend on a project where it was actually my physio who was helping me through all of the surgeries and stuff, where we thought we could run some amazing training camps at that proper Olympic elite performance level. And then for whatever reason, that kind of was put onto the back burner. And at the same time, I met someone by pure chance who I kind of gave my CV to and said, I'll come and work for you for free. And they were running a PR and communications agency in London. And 8 weeks later, this guy, Adam, very grateful, he offered me a job. He took a punt on this guy who I thought I was good at stuff, but you're not quite sure that the skills that you've built up as a runner for 15 years are actually going to be useful or tangible in the workplace. Yeah. So he took a punt on me, and then it was actually Adam and myself that co-founded the running channel. So that was born out of that relationship. So it was that kind of chance, taking a chance that led to exactly what I'm doing now. And, the running channel was Adam's idea, and he came to me as someone with running expertise and said, I think there's something here. What do you think? And then that's when we kind of cracked on with it.
And do you consider yourself, now a businessman and entrepreneur? Is that kind of how you are a runner? But have you, in your mind, transitioned into this sort of business type character now, or how do you see yourself?
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? You mentioned like the loss of identity during that injury period that I've spoken about previously. Because I definitely was like, if I met people, they were like, oh, what do you do? I'd be like, I'm a runner. And that is very much how my identity was. Thankfully now, as like a father and a husband and lots of other things, and a business person, I have other stuff to say, but I still run. I don't necessarily think of myself as a business person or entrepreneur or any of those things. I still very much have that kind of imposter syndrome, which, quite often I'll talk to my team about. Like, I'll be fairly open with them because they'll say the same thing to me. If I give them additional responsibility, then I'm trying to reassure them it's okay. It's normal to feel like maybe I don't deserve that responsibility, or am I in any way qualified to do this? And I feel that every day as a parent. So that would be how I'm thinking about the day to day. But I feel weird describing myself as a CEO.
Yeah.
When I think about what I'm doing, it's so intense, and we're all working incredibly hard. So it's not an unfair kind of title, but at the same time, I think of the word CEO, and I think of, like, I suppose these vast corporations being led by people you see on TV, rather than me having broadly started my own company and then called myself a CEO, which is how I sort of joke about it.
Well, you've got a fairly impressive engineering qualification from Cambridge, haven't you? I mean, when in terms of that career, and when you were doing that, did you ever, does engineering help you in what you're doing at the moment, or was that ever an area that you wanted to pursue more, or did it never come up?
When I went to university to do engineering, to study aerospace engineering, because I wanted to be the person that designed the aerodynamic elements of the Formula One cars. That was my, like, ambition.
Oh, okay, right.
And so my PhD was I had a plan to do a PhD, and that would have been in essentially in aerodynamics. But now I'm too far removed from that to want to go back to it necessarily. I'm passionate about running and all of the things that we do at the Running Channel to try to help people kind of around the world to enjoy running more, to get a little bit more out of their running. And the messages we get from all over the world are incredible. But the engineering element, I think, is every day it's useful to me in the way that I was taught to analyze a problem, or to it's essentially critical thinking. And I know that's not kind of exclusive to engineering, but it's a mathematical approach or an engineering approach to solving a problem, to getting an answer. There's a lot of data analysis in YouTube. Mm-hmm. There's a huge kind of access to back-end data from the thousands of views that we get, millions of views. So that's useful in that context. I like spreadsheets, that helps. But I think it's the critical thinking and that kind of approach to, well, there must be an answer, so let's try and find it, rather than just kind of giving up.
We need to talk about the Running Channel. What challenges and problems did you face? What did you have to overcome at the beginning when you were setting it up? And as we mentioned in the intro, it's phenomenally successful. You got a huge community around it now. When you set out at the beginning, how did you feel then? How daunting was the task that you had in front of you?
Thank you. Yeah, we're really proud of it, and it was daunting. I think that the most difficult thing is that I've sort of said that with my engineering background, that what I enjoy is finding an answer. The most difficult thing, even now, but certainly back then, is that no one actually really can give you a definitive answer of what works on YouTube. Like, we obviously have a very good idea now, but we're still constantly testing because the algorithm changes, and you're at the mercy of making sure you create stuff that people will click on. So it's not just enough to make a good video. You have to have a good title and a thumbnail, otherwise people scroll past. Mm. And that I still find very difficult, that there's no, mathematical solution to it. There's no, like, guaranteed answer where this is how you do it. It's obviously everything's subjective. And then also, if you ask the audience sometimes what they would like to see, which we do, we get loads of feedback from our viewers and fans, and they will say, oh, please make a video about this. And then we get like a fairly high number of requests for that. So we make a video about it, and it won't perform on YouTube. So that's frustrating. But yeah, that would be right back in the day. And in fairness, I should probably give a lot of the credit. Well, I will give the credit in the very early days to, like, creating the Running Channel from nothing. That broadly I was working in a kind of parallel role where I was loosely involved, but certainly Anna was presenting and researching and creating content and all of this stuff that you end up seeing. And then Tom was filming and editing everything. And Adam, who co-founded it, were much more hands-on in those early days. And then I brought in some additional kind of analytical thinking in the background and kind of a strategic approach, I'd like to think. But yeah, it's definitely thankfully having those people who were willing to just try. That's what we had to do, right? Just try. So that was the challenge in the beginning. Is you got to try. Otherwise, you'll never find out what does or doesn't work. And then you make some what you think is incredible content. You put it out into the ether, and then nobody watches it, and that's fairly heartbreaking. But then gradually we started to get traction, and people saw it, and that was amazing.
Was there a moment where a particular video or something that you put out there, blew up, and you thought, hey, this is it. It's going to happen. Was there a very distinctive point, or was it all just sort of gradually building over time? There's
definitely been those peaks, and that I think is fairly familiar to a lot of YouTube channels or YouTubers. Like, you have steady growth, which is what we had, and then there are times of the year, like so April for us and October probably now, because they're when the big marathons are, was when loads of people are, broadly, if you're thinking about running in the UK, you probably got the Great North Run in September, and you've got London Marathon, and right around London Marathon, we created a video running at the Brighton Marathon where Anna was essentially vlogging, and she was recording her thoughts every mile for 26 miles. And that was the first one that really we saw just these incredible numbers in terms of like, it just wasn't what we were used to, a few hundred views here and there kind of thing. And then this one was doing thousands and thousands of views and properly went on to do these big numbers. And then we realized we definitely had something. And that was that. At that point, I think it still felt like we'd already proved the concept, but then that was like, yes, this is it. And then that did definitely supercharge the growth.
You mentioned, trying different videos and some stuff works, some stuff doesn't. And thinking about businesses in general that want to interact with their audience, with their customers digitally. Are there any, do you think you can distill it down into any sort of common values, that tips, if you like, that you would offer up for any company, any business wanting to engage with a particular audience? Do you think there are commonalities that people should be bearing in mind?
I guess I give our insight into our approach, which is broadly, this isn't novel, I suppose, but authenticity at the heart of it. So the people who are on the channel are real people. They're not always super polished, and they're not going to tell you that running's like rosy and easy all of the time. And so we're essentially just like you, in inverted commas, just like our audience or viewers or fans or however they might like to refer themselves at the running channel. We're not hiding away from the fact that running is difficult. So there's no bullshit there. There's no kind of real runners, I'd hope, or anyone that's experienced running in any way, because ultimately we're for anyone who runs, not necessarily just someone who would call themselves a runner, would watch it and go, yeah, that seems legit. That seems like I'm not kind of being lied to. And I think that if you're trying to speak to a very specific audience, it's tapping into what they like, how they feel, actually understanding that. And there's a reason that I'm not on, I'm on camera sometimes, but not as much as other people, because my experiences of running are quite unique. Like, most people haven't been to the Olympics. And so either if I am doing stuff, then it's either trying to normalize me, because I'm now 40 and in no way in Olympic shape, or to give some advice on my experience. Or maybe I just shouldn't be on some of the shoots at all, because we've got some amazing people who are just like every other runner out there.
You mentioned authenticity. It's crucial, isn't it? And I think something that strikes me about the running channel is the rawness that the host being vulnerable with, and they can laugh, cry, in the same video, and that is so important, isn't it?
Yeah,
as part of the connection that you've built with the channel.
Yeah, I think we'd like to feel like we're people's friends, or that it feels like that. So we're not so out of reach. We're not like in any way like Hollywood stars, where you think that you're sort of expecting people to kind of scream and never imagine meeting you. We would like to think we're just normal people. If you turn the camera off, we're still the same, and you might want to go down to the pub with us. And if you're watching some of our content, maybe you feel like you are in the pub or in the living room with your mates. That's the idea. But hopefully we feel like mates or people who know a little bit more about running, or are willing to ask some difficult questions, or give you the answers to questions that you might have.
And this podcast is about what running can teach us about business and leadership. You've made a business out of running. Are there any direct parallels that you can think of, or you can highlight? I mean, people talk about goal setting in running and routine and structure. Is there something that jumps out for you, or even a specific example that you can take from your running experience that has helped you in the business environment?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? I do this a lot, and I go, there's two things, and then I do the first one and forget what the second one is.
Yeah.
I'm going to say one thing is improvement, like this constant strive to improve. That's something that I think our viewers want. Improvement for them will mean very different things. It could mean trying to run a much faster time over a certain distance. It could mean running a little bit further. It could just mean running more regularly. That's still measured improvement because you can kind of see it or keep track of it. That's definitely, like, I guess we as a business are constantly trying to understand what will perform on YouTube. We're trying to understand what our audience want. We're trying to make our content kind of iteratively better every time, trying to evolve the style and the tone. So that kind of really, there's a really strong parallel there across our business and my running experience. And then I've done exactly what I said I was going to do, which is forget my second point. It's the idea of building a high performance team. So I was fortunate to be an athlete at the center of a high performance team, but I have experienced how that team worked effectively with each other. And so my coach was essentially coordinating that team with me, where we needed to manage different personalities too. So that was the first time I became aware of the different personalities. Yeah. My physiologist that I work with, I didn't really understand it. When I put him on the spot about some really deep science or whatever, he didn't want to give me an answer. But that's purely his personality, which is very similar to my wife. She would want to give me the right answer, and therefore we want to go away and have a think about it, or go away and actually look up the answers rather than be put on the spot. Whereas I'm much more, I'm happy to give an answer, even if I might be wrong. And then other people I worked with were very different in terms of their motivations or their ability to motivate me in particular situations. Yeah. So being at the center of that high performance team, and then, like I said, I definitely don't feel I'm a finished article and being able to do this, but that's what I would try and do at work. Trying to make the team feel like they are parts of a high performance team, that I trust them to do their job, that they work for the business and have been hired because they're great, and that they know more about what they do than I do. So that's why I would trust them to do it.
A few questions before to finish up with music or no music. Do you run these days with a song in the background, and what gets you going? Is there any sounds that you like to hear when you go running?
So I never would have during my career, because I felt like it was somehow a distraction. Maybe on the occasional sort of steady run, but definitely not during like interval training or anything like that. Whereas now, yes, I would almost always run with either music or podcasts, just to take my, like, it's my chance to escape and to listen to something. So I have two playlists actually on my watch that I'll listen to. One is kind of quite folky, like happy folk, I think it's called. And then one is actually like euphoric dance anthems from, that I remember, kind of Ministry of Sound type stuff from back in the day. I find that quite uplifting when I'm running.
Yeah.
And then the podcasts I listen to are always quite comedy. So I listen to Shagged, Married, Annoyed, and I listen to Parenting Hell, which is very relevant for me. But I think Rob Beckett and Josh Widdicombe are so funny in that, and very real. And actually, very recently they've been speaking very openly about, borderline kind of almost emotional breakdown for Josh Widdicombe, speaking very openly about the pressure he's felt as a parent and as a comic, but in a really funny, self-deprecating way, very British.
Brilliant. Some great different things for people to check out there. I've got to ask you about this parkrun world record. It's something I'm absolutely fascinated by. Can you remember the specific day when it happened? And for people that, I'm sure people are aware of what parkrun is, but tell us what the time was.
I ran 13:48. So there were people peppering that now, actually. So by the time you put this out, someone may well have stolen that. But I've hung on to it for 10 years because it was August 2012. So I'm pretty proud of that. So when someone takes it, I'm okay with that.
Can you remember the day? Can you remember the conditions? Because it was Bushy Park, wasn't it? In the home of parkrun, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the first ever Bushy Park time trial, as it was back in the early 2000s. Yeah, I can. I remember it vividly. I actually remember that more vividly than a lot of my races, like my actual, big championship races, because it was one of the best moments of my career, not because of the record necessarily. It was during the London 2012 Olympics. I'd just been knocked out of the semi-finals on the Monday, I think, and didn't make the final. So I was desperately kind of disappointed. Yeah. And then that would have been the Monday. And then on Saturday, so 5 days later, I did the parkrun in Bushy whilst the Olympics was still going on. And the feeling, and I know I said that I enjoyed Beijing more, but there was nothing like the feeling and the positivity in London during that period. It was if you weren't there, it's impossible to explain.
I remember it. Yeah, remember it well. Went to a few different sporting events. Just being around London, it was magical, wasn't it? It was wonderful.
Yeah, exactly that. And Bushy Park is one of the biggest park runs. So free weekly time 5Ks every Saturday. That's where it all started. There was over 1,000 people there. I was trying to kind of sneak under the radar and just rock up and run it. And my coach had said, let's go for the record. The record was 14 minutes. No one had ever broken 14 minutes in a park run. And but we knew the organisers. We I lived and trained in that area, so the event director had spotted us and asked what was happening, and he said something about the record, and I kind of gave a pretty non-committal answer. And then he had his megaphone for the beginning, and he kind of announced that I was there. I can't remember whether he said anything about the record, but the cheer that I got from these 1,000 people was almost as, it was much more personal than say that the noise in the stadium in London. So that noise was like kind of hair on the back of your neck. I was standing on end, proper. Gave me chills. It was just this incredible emotional outpouring of support. And then, we set off and kind of the rest. But I remember it vividly. It was a beautiful sunny day, not a breath of wind. Bushy Park's not actually a very fast course. It's grass and gravel, so there's no road at all. And I think the distinction now is there's lots of faster courses and there's the super shoes, so I do think that someone will come along and pit my record. But yeah, I was really, really proud of it. I stayed around for hours afterwards chatting to people, and just that actually exemplifies what we tried to do at the Running Channel. That feeling after a park run of shared experience and people enjoying the same passion and community and so on. That's ultimately what sort of inspired the idea of the Running Channel. It's that's for a short period of time on a Saturday morning. Can we kind of be a companion for people online that gives them the answers to their questions and that they can trust, and that they can be entertained, and that make them laugh and make them cry and all of that sort of stuff.
In those days, did you get a token when you finished? Did you have to sort of queue up and do that? You did?
Yes,
right.
Yes, I did. I did. There wasn't a queue though. No.
Obviously.
But yeah, funnily enough. But yeah, there's an incredible, really grainy phone video of me finishing and crossing the line. And you see one of the volunteers who's clearly just seen the time on her colleagues kind of stopwatch leap up into the air in this kind of really jubilant celebration.
Wow.
And I've got a photo of myself, my wife, and a few of the other of us that ran the parkrun that day. My coach was on the bike with me most of the way around as well. And that's something we talk about. We talk about it amongst each other, not in a weren't we great, just in a kind of, that was magical.
And I love that, the way that you talked about capturing the spirit of that and taking it forward with the Running Channel and other things you do, because I do a few park runs near me, and I know exactly what you mean, and the guys and the men and women that turn up and the kids that help out. It's just such a wonderful community event, and this is happening all over the world, and being able to sort of capture that and use take it to other spaces as you've done with the Running Channel, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. That's it's a nice fitting inspiration, and also a good analogy for what we're trying to achieve.
A couple of questions to finish before I let you go. Running aside, can you name one business tool, an app, maybe a person, something that you couldn't do without in business that really helps you?
That's a good question. Something that I couldn't do without. I have fits and starts of how effective I am at it, but we use Monday.com as I think it's a terrible name, but because it's very hard to say to someone, can you just put that on Monday? But if anyone's not familiar, it's kind of like Asana, Trello, it's a productivity planner, to-do list. It's all of these things. And probably I've forgotten the author, but it's like The Art of Productivity, or Getting Things Done, I think it's called. And I just found that the simplicity of having one list or one place, one repository for all of your actions. And so ultimately that's a repository for all of our team's actions as well as just mine. Mm-hmm. But knowing that I don't have to remember everything, and every time I do think of something that I put it in there, and then it's kind of not dealt with, but at least I'm not going to forget it. I know it's very simple, and I suppose the extension of that is then the advice is that I had that was pretty powerful is your brain can't kind of switch off if it's still processing a task. So even if you've written it down and you're not going to forget it, if you haven't actually got closure on that task, i.e. by deciding what action you need to take, then it's very difficult for your brain to let it go. So actually taking the extra few minutes when you write the task down to, rather than write something really generic like presentation to shareholders, it's actually taking the time to write down a subtask or write down actually the action to take, which might be compile updated financial information or whatever it might be. That then your brain will allow you to, you've done the bit of processing that then allows your brain to kind of switch off.
Makes total sense. I get that, yeah. And business aside for a second, what's your favorite bit of running kit accessory, something you can't do without? I'm sure you've had so many different things over the years, but is there, and you don't have to mention brand names or anything like that, but I'm just curious, what kind of thing is it that helps you?
I've got a couple probably. So my watch has music on it, and I don't run with a phone. I don't have a pocket to put it in. So I was going to say the combination of my watch and headphones. So I have Bluetooth headphones that are really good for running, and my watch, and that means I'm like pretty self-sufficient. My watch has like contactless payment on it. It can navigate me. I can put courses on there, and actually that's the element I'd say is the best. I love the most is if I go somewhere new, like I'm on holiday, I go into the app for the watch. I can choose other people's routes, or I can say I want to run 10K in roughly that direction, and it will put together all of the most popular roads or trails that are run on in that area, and it'll create a route for me. I've done that in so many locations now where I just go out the door and know I'm going to run 10K, and I don't have to do like a boring out and back up the main road. I can go off on the beaten trail, and I've just found some of the most incredible runs have been those where I would have found these little twisty turns or trails up a hill or across a farmer's field or whatever, but you have the confidence to do it because you know that through the heat map of several other 100,000 users in that area, you're going somewhere that actually was going to give you a loop.
And are you doing sort of side question to that? Are you doing much, fell trail running, running in different terrains these days compared to, I guess it was predominantly for many years, track and road running that you were doing?
I actually never ran on the road really. And so even now I don't run on the road at all if I can help it. Like I never considered it trail running. And in fairness, when I was based in south of London for a lot of my career, where I was running was places like Bushy Park, Richmond Park, Wimbledon Common. So whilst they weren't on the road, they were very like manicured trails. And then now the countryside around me is beautiful. It's more difficult in the winter because it's the kind of mud that sort of builds up on your shoes. But we also have some of the forests near me are kind of pine needle trails. So they're actually fine in the winter. That would be my favorite running, pine needle trails, the smell and the kind of just soft enough underfoot, but not so sandy or slippery or anything like that. That's what I would choose.
That's a lovely picture to take away in my mind. And then the final question: what advice would you give to anybody who's listening to this, who's in a business role, a leadership role, and they're considering getting more active, specifically taking up running? And you can't say watch the running channel because that's a given. What would you say to those people? What do you think running could add to their life in business and leadership?
I definitely think more clearly when I'm on a run. It allows me to process some of the stuff subconsciously or consciously that is going on day to day, like whether that's an interaction with a team member, how to deal with a difficult situation with a client, or maybe solve a problem. And actually sometimes I solve stuff that I didn't even realize was a problem when I'm on a run. Like something subconscious will come to me as an idea and I think, oh, that is the solution to the thing I was thinking about last week. And I think that's because this, again, not brilliant physiological understanding here, but I remember the TV series House. He would always sit, the doctor, he would sit and throw a ball against the wall. That was his thought process. I vividly remember that. And then I remember reading something about how if you do catch and throw a ball whilst talking or thinking, that allows you to problem solve in a totally different way. It uses your brain in a different conscious and subconscious way. And I think that running has a similar effect for me.
Andy, parkrun world record holder. I'll say it's still there, and I'll leave that in when we put this podcast out. Thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful to catch up, and all the best with the running channel. We'll put the details, if anybody isn't aware of the running channel, in the show notes for this one, so people can check it out. But it is literally, isn't it, therunningchannel.com?
That's right. And on YouTube, youtube.com/runningchannel.
Andy, thanks so much, and all the best. Thanks for being part of Run the Business.
Great. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you to Andy Baddeley for his time on Run the Business this week. What an inspiring guy. It was lovely to hear his memories of the Olympics. I'm still gobsmacked about his parkrun record, which, as of today, as I am saying this, still stands. Let me just put that in perspective. Almost 42.5 million finishes have happened in parkrun. Andy has the quickest time of all of them, in 13 minutes and 48 seconds. That's fantastic. I don't think that's changing for a while. So what are we taking away from that conversation? I loved Andy's story about how, as an athlete, his coaching team analysed his personality profile and of the people around him to help get the best out of him in pressure situations and know how to operate. And how he consciously transferred that learning into business and the people that he works with and interacts with, trying to understand what makes people tick. Different people behave in different ways, especially under pressure. And I know most runners don't take part in psychological profiling, but developing empathy is such a powerful thing if you work with teams, if you're a leader. You got to know how your people feel. Speaking to Andy's success with the running channel, I love the way he and the team have really thought about their audience. And I know this is an obvious one, but they've really got granular with the values and the tone of voice they use in engaging them. Authenticity is such an overused word these days, but I think he's really helped capture it in the videos that they do on the running channel. They don't sugarcoat it. You don't win all the time. It's really hard, but that's okay because it makes success when it comes along something you appreciate more, I think. As a leader, he also knows, and he talked about this, stepping back and letting the team take the spotlight. That's so true of many great leaders. It's not all about the person at the front. It's not all about the CEO. He was at the center of a high-performance team when he was an athlete, and he wants to build a high-performance team with the running channel, trusting his people to get on with it in the right moments. What a great guy to work with. You can check out the running channel on YouTube or via therunningchannel.com. We will finish this week with a quote on teamwork from Andrew Carnegie. Teamwork is the ability to work together towards a common vision, the ability to direct individual accomplishments towards organizational objectives. It's the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. Have a think about that one. I'm Anthony Gay, and until next time, keep running and keep chasing your goals.